Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the International Conference on the topic United We Stand for Humanity. My name is Professor David Gross, and I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Education at Bar-Ilan University and the chairholder of the UNESCO Chair for Values Education, Tolerance and Peace at the Faculty of Education, Bar-Ilan University. We are here in a special session featuring a keynote lecture by Professor Victoria Shuami from University of London. On October 7th, the world lost its humanity. The harrowing events witnessed on that day in the southern border of Israel, where Hamas troops targeted and attacked innocent civilians Israelis solely because they were Jews, subjecting them to brutality, violence, and cruelty, affecting and attacking young children, babies, raping innocent women and shooting them, and attacking and raping men. October 7th represents a new stage in the decline of humanity. The atrocities of October 7th not only harmed the victims, but also struck at the essence of our global humanity. Following the turmoil and severe earthquake experienced on October 7th, there was a fear that we would never fully recover and be unable to heal from the human tragedy that struck peacemakers and those who believed in the possibility of shared existence between Arab and Jews in the State of Israel. I remember the first day I arrived at the Faculty of Education building at Bar-Ilan University during the war. Ramat Gan area, which is close to Tel Aviv area, where the university is located, was hit by missiles, and there was great fear of what might happen. On my first visit to the university, I entered a supermarket near the university to buy some sweet for the office and the administrative staff. When I entered the building, the first woman I encountered was Naime, our Arab-Palestinian cleaning woman, a Muslim woman wearing a head covering. I approached her.
مسلمة عربية وجهت إليها وقدمت لها بعض الحلويات. نظرنا إلى عيني بعضنا بعضا وتعاطفنا.
זו בפניה של זו, והתחילו לזלוג דמעות.
Solidarity, care, concern, and a promise for a better future for both of us. Since then, even in times of war, I continue to lead conflict management workshops that I've been conducting for 28 years among Arab and Jewish students on campus at Bar-Ilan University. We faced a very challenging semester in meetings that forced me to make a paradigm shift in my facilitation work. I developed a new pedagogy through which we tried together to discover our shared humanity. When thinking about the keynote lecturer for our conference, I immediately thought of Professor Victoria Shuami, who is not only a groundbreaking researcher, but above all, a unique individual, very sensitive, humble, and a real mensch. Dr. Victoria Shuami is an associate professor at the University College of London in the Faculty of Institute of Education. Her interests are gender, identity, and race through the lens of intersectionality, focusing on leadership and the lived experience of Black women and girls. She is a member of the Gender Education Executive Conference, chair for British Educational Leadership, Management and Administration Society, chair of the International Studies SIG in the American Education Research Association, AERA, and co-convener, Gender Network European Educational Research Association. She is on the editorial board of Bloomsbury Educational Leadership, Innovative, Critical, and Interdisciplinary Perspectives and Transforming Education through Critical Educational Leadership, Policy and Practice, as well as assistant editor for the International Journal of Leadership in Education. She has an international profile based on the dissemination of her research through publication and teaching. Her scholarly work is acclaimed nationally and internationally. Victoria develops fresh conceptual frameworks focusing on equity and social justice, especially the interplay between people and the sophistication of behaviors which lead to disengagement with the promotion of equality. Her work shows how culture and cultural background have the potential to disrupt power structures and lead to transformational change. Victoria is experienced in engaging with senior policymakers and leaders of education. She served as the advisor of local education authority on the recruitment and development of international teachers. She has also been involved in projects which evaluated the provision of education and teacher development in her role as a senior education consultant for the Royal London Borough of Greenwich. Victoria led a research study of the Reset project in Greenwich. This entailed the evaluation of the impact of the project in lessening serious youth violence and exploitation. Current projects include review of sixth form provision in a local authority and experiences of Black girls in private schools. The lecture of Professor Victoria Tsunami is entitled, How Can We Realize Our Common Humanity? Professor Victoria Tsunami, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much. I don't know what to say really, but that's a very nice introduction to myself. It went on for a while, but I hope you have patience. But before I start, I just want to say that it was I had anguish doing this because so much has gone on over the last few months, and I wasn't sure whether I would be the right person or whether I should do it or what to do really. So, you know, 4:30 this morning, I was still thinking about what to do. So anyway, what I do want to say is really to echo what Professor Zenet has mentioned, that the 7th of October was indeed a tragedy, and a tragedy which never thought would happen to you know, Israel and Israelis. And so my heart actually bleeds for all Israelis at this present moment. And at the same time, what has also taken place since is a disaster. And where we go from here, I don't know, and it's not for me to say, but there's a lot of work to be done. And so the title of my talk, and I'm hoping we're going to be able to have some time for some discussion, is Overcoming Cultural Clashes Through Our Shared Humanity. And even doing the title took time to put together. So Manuel, I'm not sure whether you could share my slides. I'm happy for you to do it, or I do it. I don't mind.
Why don't you try and share them and see?
Okay, I can do it then. That's fine. Yep. Can you see them all?
Click on the presentation mode.
Yes, we can see it.
Fantastic.
But we're seeing with the
Oh,
slides
okay.
on the side. Can you click on presentation mode?
Yeah, I've done it. Yeah.
No, we're seeing your view. Click on swap displays. The top
Oh,
left
right.
hand
Okay.
corner.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with you. Let's just change it again. Sorry.
Reshare what you did, and then you can click on swap displays like we did yesterday.
Yeah. Sorry.
There we go. Click on in the top. Let me just show you over here. Swap displays. We have.
Oh God. Oh, I see. Yes, I see. Yep.
Perfect.
Right. Fantastic. Well, sorry about that. So, as I said, it's going to be on overcoming cultural clashes through our shared humanity. So, as time's moving on, I just want to just get started, if I may. Tell me if the slides aren't showing.
Perfect.
Right,
No,
thank you.
perfect.
Brilliant. So the purpose really was to engage in a conversation with all of you to explore understandings of culture in the context of higher education and how they come to clash through our shared humanity. So to do that, there's a few things I'd like to do to start with, if I may do that. I do aim to have a touch on, I'm not going to spend hours because we've only got a certain amount, kind of look at some loose definitions of culture. What is, what is a culture clash? And then think about humanity, and then move on to shared humanity. But within that as well, I will also pull out some of the concepts which I use regarding my work and how that moves us forward with our thinking. So let's ponder on this. And I first of all, we look at that particular word of culture and how that starts to really develop within itself. So I ask ourselves, what do you have? Do you have a culture? And as you ponder on that and think, now, do I have a culture? And what is that culture? And what do I mean by that culture? I think that's something for starting point, where I just want you to think about it. I'm not asking you to share about it. I want you to think about it. Do I have a culture? And what does that mean to have a culture or to do that? And the other point, which is, so how do you know? How do you know? And I think this is really important, because if you come to the United Kingdom and you, first of all, you ask about certain things, which is about the weather or whether about the food or whatever it is, you start to understand and unwrap what is going on with culture within the UK. But of course, we're made up of 4 nations. So you've got England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland. So each one of those, there will also be different cultural aspects, whether it's to do with the food, whether it's to do with what we do, the way we dress, the way we talk, and all those aspects. And so how do you know how to deal with any of that as we move on? So I think it's important to ponder on this, because we make assumption that we know, and most of the time we don't know. Or if we do know, we're looking at this through a much of a Western way of looking at things. So I thought some simple things really of how we can define how we're thinking of culture, or how I'm thinking. So the way of life for an entire society. So I'm going to use the United Kingdom. So you might think, well, actually, I know the culture of the United Kingdom. But when you start to unpack it, do you really know? And what is it you really know? So I've said here as well, it's the special intellectual or artistic endeavors or products, what we might call high culture, as opposed to popular culture. So it could be that you know very well that class is integrated within the United Kingdom, particularly with England. So everything is seen through the lens of class, whether how you hold your knife and fork, how you walk, how you talk, how you behave, all the attributes are all part of the culture of England. When you look at Scotland or Ireland or Wales, then you've got another aspect of culture which we are also dealing with. Now, I'm taking this simple because I want to go complex, but I just wanted to go simple first. You may have also come across these particular terminologies, term of things. So culture is a state of mind. She's a cultured individual. And understanding that, thinking, so if you're coming from another country and someone's saying, what do you mean by a cultured individual? What do you mean by that? Or culture as a civilization. India is just so much more cultured than Britain. What are they talking about here? Are they bringing in this kind of exotic aspect of culture? Or are they thinking about something else? As a collective body of arts, common sense uses, I'm going to visit a gallery to get my culture fix. And you yourself may say things like that because you feel this notion of embodiment that you want to go to a gallery to get this culture fix. Or really looking at it from a sociological aspect, culture is the way of life of people and how they all belong. But again, that in itself has the challenges to deal with. But if I continue with some other definitions of culture, that it's complex and a whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, law and customs, and any other capabilities and habits required by people as a member of society. So as you start to see, we're starting to unpack, it's this notion of belonging as well. Because what happens if you don't share the same aspect of culture, but you still live in the same space, but it's complex, it becomes complicated because the belief in the art or the morals perhaps are different and don't align themselves with what you're thinking. So what happens then? And I will come on to that. But you're still also a member of society. I think the final one which I want to say as I move on is is it a collective of programming of the mind which distinguishes the members of one group or category of people from another. I sit here, and many of you may know that I have been adopted by white German Jewish parents from the age of 6 months. And so I lived in a pure white area, not London at all, but in Somerset, which is a very much itself, it's the west part of England, very white, not many cultures there at all. And there was a lot of thinking around, so what does that mean when I reflect as a person going backwards and looking back into my life and how I engage with my parents, which of course were Jewish, my family members, my parents' family members, many of them were more religious Jewish as against my mother, who was very liberal. So it was very much thinking about what is the family and how does the culture impact on somebody like myself. And I think another one is the set of the attitudes, values, beliefs, and behaviors. When I came into somewhere like London for the first time, I was also raised by Jewish, but also they were very upper class. So class was something which I had to understand, which I didn't understand. So my attributes and my attitude, my values and my beliefs were shared by a group of people which were very different. However, I was seen to be a different type of person because of how people perceive culture and also use that to define individuals. But of course, every individual is different, but it's communicated from one generation to the next. And I think this is very, very interesting, but it's also complicated as well. So when we look at the different layers of depth, and we've got the observable artifacts and what that looks like, we can actually see that. You can go, okay, we can make sense of that. But then we start to get in a bit more tricky areas of values. And whose values are we talking about? Are we talking about values which are colonial values? Or are we talking about values which you feel are kind of alienated to yourselves and you push against those because they're values which don't fit into your layers, your values? Or are we looking at basic underlying assumptions, which again gets in the way of what we're trying to look at when we can perceive culture, or when we think, well, that person is cultured, what do we mean by that? Where we look at also the uncultured, where we start to tap into Mead's way of looking when they first took their lenses to untap what was in the continent of Africa, where there was no thinking about culture, but there was a lot of observable artifacts, values, and also basic underlining of assumptions. So just looking at that picture, I'm not sure how clear it is, but particularly you see 4 women sitting on a bench. And you've got some other people over across there as well. And you think, so what do you see? And again, you kind of start to ask yourself, what am I looking at? Do I look at what clothing they're wearing? Do I look at that they're all sitting on a bench? Do I start to see, well, you know, what are they doing? And what are the people across from them doing? Do I think about what they're wearing? You know, what's happening in that moment? And I think that goes back to the layers of depth when we start to unpack culture. These particular women, I have no idea what they're actually doing or what they're, you know, what's actually happening with them. But it was something which I thought was quite an interesting picture. They could be actors. They could be acting for a part and they are not religious at all. They may be just, being sitting there. So I don't know. But I think it's, what do we see and how did that in itself start to contribute to our assumptions, our values, and also other aspects around culture. So moving on to, which connects a little bit more with what I do and also how I was introduced. So I've got an umbrella there and just the little aspects of rain dropping down, which are all the different things here. Just a few things I've put up there. So if we look at gender, now gender has got very complicated as well. You've got gender identities. So it's not gender as a whole. You've got a range of identities around gender. And I'm very interested in women and what's going on with women. So you've got, you think about ethnicity, education, nationality. Some countries will not use race. They won't use the terminology, they'd use nationality. Generation, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, age, race, and religion. So you've got an umbrella there, which I argue contributes to culture. It contributes to that messy, tricky aspect of culture, which I think really helps us understand. But also it starts to create what I would call a cultural clash. Now I'm going to start focusing more on the workplace and where what Professor Zenet had mentioned earlier when she came across her colleague when she first started in her position she's in now, who happened to be a female from a different culture. There wasn't this, but it could have been. So this culture this clash and what that means is what I'm going to spend a little bit of time on now. I kind of like to think about culture clash. It's actually not a clash at all, but a point of divergence, rather like branches or roots of a tree growing in different directions. Arabic religion as a case in point, growing and thriving in different directions, where attitudes, customs, morals, and opinions diverge both in reality and perceptions, where perhaps other exogenous formation of cultures, i.e. European, African, Southeast, East Asian, etc., intersect with the various branches of the original to form new and competing ones. Oops, sorry. I look at this and I think, okay, culture clash entwined there. Now you may also be able to see some of these parts here, which look like rope, but it is the different roots of a tree. And I kind of look at culture clash as something like that, where it's an ongoing journey. So I haven't come to give you any solutions, but I've come to kind of open up that particular knotty part where you can see within this tree that it's all entwined, because we are all entwined, and there's all this notion of what are we doing as we are entwined to become one, but one with individual differences and not assimilate, because assimilation is a very difficult and dangerous way of thinking if you want people just to assimilate. So I kind of move into, and some of you would know Stuart Hall's work around culture. Many of you would have perhaps, depending on what you studied. But there's no understanding Englishness. Now I'm going back to the UK. And there's no understanding of Englishness without understanding its imperial and colonial dimensions. Now, for me, that's very much the heart of me understanding culture, because there's this notion of Englishness. And I was steeped in this Englishness to be this person. And I do have a clash with my siblings, my daughters at times, my daughters and family, because of this notion of Englishness and what that means and how I present, or how I expect them to present themselves within this way of thinking. So what does that mean? And why have I even dared to start to think about culture, unpacking it slightly to be able to bring you onto some of the conceptual work which I do, which I called, this particular part is the tangled web of blackness. So I kind of like concepts. And I use this because of where I've come from, being a 6-month-old baby in a Jewish household with whiteness all around me and no touch of anything but white. So I feel that, or I believe that it's a tangled web of blackness, because what does it stand for? If we look at the notion of blackness equals non-white, when Jewish communities went to America, of course they were seen as black to begin with, but they became white. They may not see themselves as white anymore because of all the different things which have happened over the last few years. But also the same with Italians, the same with Russians. They were seen as white, and mostly also not very much, not very socially economic at the time. So the notion of blackness is not about skin tone. It's also about the aspect of culture and what that stands for with identity. So the historical context of blackness, I use the metaphor of the big house. And the big house I see as slavery. So it's the plantation house. So I make reference to the big house as the plantation house. And I'm very interested in the relationships and the power dynamics which took place in the big house. And those strategies adopted by enslaved people and how this plays out in the workplace. It's kind of complicated, but it's very interesting. So what I'm interested in is the plantation house and how that in itself, many of the ways which happened, it now plays out in the workplace. So the particularly behaviors of white and black women within the interplay of race with colorism and gender. So if you think about the big house and how the enslaved people were enslaved and who was in charge and who came up the steps to be in charge and who was able to work in the house or work on the fields, is something which happens within the workplace. Many of you also would have heard of white fragility from Robin's work. Well, I've got another term there, which is white women syndrome, WWS, which is again around that, but it's about this notion of guilt and what that means when they are faced with being identified as discriminatory, but they don't really recognize it, but it's something which others recognize within them. So going back to the tangled web of the big house, I identify there is the plantation house, and within here is the psychological aggression. Now, this can happen across any different aspects across the world. So I identify that there's 4 different ways within the workplace. So if you say the big house is a plantation house, and I'm now transferring that into the workplace, you'd have a disruptor, so somebody which would have been enslaved and working outside, an activist, somebody who would work across outside and inside, the pacifist and complicit, and how they then work together to be able to either develop various ways of communicating to be able to function. And this is the bit here which is the psychological aggression of what's happening here. So the disruptor would be asked to work in the plantation house, but they may also be disrupting and be interrupting what's happening here because they are more concerned about what's happening to their people out in the field. The activists may not be invited because they're more of an activist. And so they will be working around to get things where, different communities start to make things happen. The pacifist perhaps would be the ideal person to work in the plantation house because they are very much the yes master and they want to please the master within that. And the complicit, again, will keep their head down. You might recognize some of these people at work. And if you think about the various communities, the various groups of people who don't want to represent, they may be able to, say if I think about our workplace in the university, somebody may not identify that they are somebody which is from a particular religious group, unless of course they are displaying within their clothing or any other way that they are from a particular group. So they may be very passive and they may hide or assimilate and want to assimilate into whiteness because they feel it's easier to be able to assimilate as to stand out and say something. So this is what I'm talking about here. I also then think about it in the workplace and the patterns. And there's a story which goes with that, which I'm not going to do now, but I do want to move on. Hopefully time's okay. Yeah, move on to the next part, which is around sophisticated and everyday racism. If you get stuck on the word racism, you can put any ism there and it's the same thing. But what I've done is I see it as sophisticated. So coming back from Somerset and coming to work in London, but not living directly in London, I find that the racism or the discrimination outside of the city into somewhere like Somerset is raw, R-A-W, very raw. Whereas in the city, it's very sophisticated. And it's a bit like that tree where I showed you the branches. It's all entwined. So it's very difficult to unpack what is actually going on. So it's sophisticated racism is based on systemic structures designed to promote racism while disingenuously appearing to promote anti-racist or equitable policies. You may understand what I mean there when you know what's going on in universities, because universities internationally are very similar. The perpetrators would not want to be accused of racist behaviors, and they play lip service to condemning racism. Sometimes this form of racism is unconscious and subconscious, but the whole idea is that it's entwined and it's trying to, and when you try to kind of tease it out, it's very difficult to tease out because it's entwined and it's part of this promoting anti-racist or equitable policies. And of course, Sarah Ahmed talks about that with her work about belonging. And there's a framework there which I look at as well. And people really don't want to get involved with this unless it's interest divergence. If it's of interest to the university, then of course, this is what we want to do. But also an acute sense of privilege that we do need to, because, you know, we're the right type of people to be involved with this to stop things happening. But disingenuous support, what does that mean? It could be some of the language. Well, you know, I'm your, you know, the white savior coming along to support you. Could be disingenuous support. Shielding of racist ideas, trying to hide behind it and what that means. And I think you can all understand what I mean by that. Don't get stuck on the aspect that I'm talking about, just about blackness, because it's about the notions of discrimination and what that means. So then we look at, again, humanity. And what do we think about this? Well, again, I'm really looking at identity. I think our identity is our core. It's our core, and how we then, how we start to really unpack humanity. It's about that. It's not set of fixed attributed the unchanging essence of the inner self, but a constantly shifting process of positioning. Many of us will be in that position all the time, moving, shifting. What does that look like? We tend to think of identity as taking us back to our roots, the part of us which remains essentially the same across time. In fact, identity is always never complete a process of becoming, a process of shifting identifications rather than a singular, complete, finished state of being. Again, Stuart Hall and what he's saying there, I think helps with that. A couple more things I'd like to say is that it's also beyond labels. How do we share this? It is beyond labels. For me, being invited here, even though I get rather anxious about it and thinking, oh my goodness, why would it be me? There's somebody else. Well, it's about beyond labels. It's beyond stereotypes. And it's seeing that there are so many things to give when we think about culture. And we're looking at how do we start to unpack what we're trying to do and understand the clashes which are there for this as well. So everyone as a human being means moving beyond the limited categories and stereotypes that separate us. So you may already have some kind of thinking, oh, what is it? What is a Black female all about? Well, I think it's this, 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 and this. But then you then break it down because it's none of those at all. Everybody's different. We're not a homogenous group. It involves recognizing that beneath our diverse appearances, cultures, and backgrounds, we all share the fundamental experiences of joy, pain, love, and loss. And understanding that sometimes is very difficult. So just a couple of slides within the Academy. Now, these are real quotes because I'm doing some research because I also chair the Athena Swan, which is the gender equality for our faculty. And we do it for the whole institution as well. It's a big piece of work, which we have to do. So I'm doing it. It's graded, and we're at the moment trying to get the silver. So these are some of the points from our department, our faculty. And I'll just spend a couple of minutes on that while you just look at that. These are anonymous quotes which we've been collecting in relation to our culture.
Victoria, we have 1 more minute and
okay.
Then open the floor for discussion.
Yep. Thank you. So I've sent you this one. Then there's one more here. Have a look at this one. These have come from in our faculty. And then the final one is this one here. Okay, thank you. And there's some references.
Wow, Victoria.
Thank you very much.
Dear Victoria, thank you so much for this inspiring and thought-provoking lecture. I think that we can start now a whole seminar on this issue. And I would like to ask you the first question. Where do you locate the word responsibility within your paradigm, within your conceptual paradigm?
That's a really good question. Thank you for that. I would say responsibility starts with yourself. I think it starts with yourself. You can't look out the window and point to others without understanding and taking responsibility yourself. And I think that's where it starts from.
Thank you, Victoria. And I see that Michelle Kornfeld, she wants to ask a question. Yes, please. We cannot, please.
You're muted.
Yeah, you are muted.
Open the mic.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm a creativity researcher, and I liked what you said about identity, that it is a process of becoming, because that's a creative process and it's connected to humanity. And I was just wondering, you may have been exposed to so many cultures, and each culture defines creativity differently. So how do you define creativity out of all these impressions?
That's a hard question.
Creativity education.
That's a hard question. How do I define it? it's still evolving. I mean,
Yeah.
the biggest thing for me, I think, is that I did sociology and philosophy combined. So I've got one foot in one and one foot in the other, but I'm very interested in how we use our creative selves to think through that lens. So it's evolving. It evolves all the time. But thank
Yes.
you.
Thank
There's
you
I
very
guess that this is what we were trying to teach, thinking for yourself and how to develop in a humane way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But a lot of people find that difficult because it puts you in a space of
Yeah.
perhaps a little bit of nervousness. And it's complex because people
Yeah.
want straight answers. They
Yeah.
want to be able to say yes and no.
Yes.
I've grown up in this more complex way of thinking.
Yes,
Yeah.
one of the first things that we need to nurture when we raise creative thinkers is tolerance to ambiguity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Thank you.
I fully agree with you, Michelle. Once you acknowledge the ambivalence and the depth of ambiguity, you can start dealing with your own humanity. And I think that that's a very important point. And thank you. I see here Professor Leslie Bash. Good to see you. Please, you are invited to ask a question. Please. Professor Leslie Bash.
Leslie, feel free to ask questions.
Good to see you as well.
See you.
Yes, well, it's not so much a question as a comment. Pardon?
We can hear you.
Yes, Leslie.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much for your really interesting presentation. I'm retired now, but some years ago, a research student of mine worked with some young refugees from Kosovo in South London, and she was talking to them and asking them about their identity. And she said, "Well, how do you see yourself?" Because they were 14-year-old boys and they come from Kosovo, but they become very much part of the South London youth scene and very much associated with popular culture in South London. They said, "Well, do you see yourself as British? Do you see yourself as Kosovan? Do you see yourself as South London?" Or whatever it was. And the answer from some of them came back, and I thought was interesting. He said, "Well, it depends who's asking as to how they saw their identity." And that led me to the view that identity is something that you have said. It's a shifting notion as far as your identity is concerned. And it also implies what you're not as well as what you are.
Yeah.
And that may change from time to time. And so it led me to think about identity as something that you do as much as it's something that you're labeled with. So I just wondered what your comment on that might be.
Thank you, Leslie.
For this wonderful question, which adds to our paradigm, the whole issue of context, the Balkan context and the context as a concept. Yes, please, Victoria.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie. That's really important because it also links with when you get asked the question, so where are you from? And it's the same kind of shift in paradigm because if somebody says, where are you from? And you say, well, I'm from England. They say, no, but where are you really, really from? And of course, they don't want to know whether you're from England. They want to know where the history of your parents are from. And it's a bit like those young people you were saying about they came from Kosovo. So they can, depending on what their shade is, they could very much assimilate into whiteness unless they lost their accent. If they still had an accent, well, then it's a bit more difficult because people will be asking them, where are you from? Where's the accent from, etc. But I think you're absolutely right. It depends on context is what you actually say and
Only
how
a
that.
few more minutes,
Yeah.
please. We're into the break already.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, one
No,
more.
it's fine.
One more question. So, Victoria, now we will give you, the concluding sentence about the interrelationships between context, culture, and humanity, please.
Yeah, that's a difficult one. I think the way to end this would be it's evolving, and to understand that when we look at culture and we think about clash, we go back to the picture of the roots and how that's entwined, and that entwining is about our individualities and how we are able to bring our individual selves to be part of that humanity. And I think that's the way to end that.
Beautiful, so inspiring, so important, especially in those days. You mentioned the word evolving. I would like to add the word thriving. And I think that it adds a lot of hope, and it will help us to better encounter our own humanity. Professor Victoria Tsunami, I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart and the heart of all of us. I think that we had a very inspiring session. Thank you very much. And let's pray together that all of us will be courageous enough to encounter our own humanity. Thank you. Thank you very much. And shalom from Israel.
Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you all in conferences and coming back to Israel some stage soon. Thank you, Megan.
Hope to see you soon.
Yeah.